What's up, guys? Welcome to the voyage through Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitive scene. I'm here with my boy, Nick. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first off?
I'm Nick. If you've been watching the Nautical, as you should be, and you should be subscribed, you'll see me there plenty of times. I'm a local to Abilene space. I've been playing in this region for as long as I can remember. Jordan wants us to do something about going through competitive and getting back into the game as a young adult. And he wanted to talk to somebody that's been experienced. I've been around here for probably 10 to 12 to 15 years playing in competitive tournaments around here ever since I was a little kid. So I think that I can help with gauging some interest in the competitive side for somebody who may be more casual.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of had this idea for this kind of podcast style. I was looking on my Konami app the other day, and I realized that December is actually my 6th month of trying to play the game somewhat competitively. So I thought it would be a cool little recap to go back through and look and see how I've progressed as a player over the past 6 months, and just like where I came from and where I'm at now, and then kind of look forward to what I need to go on. So first off, what we're going to start off with is just a couple of questions for you, just so we can get a little bit more of an idea of who you were. What deck did you start off playing competitive with, and then what deck are you on now?
Oh gosh. Okay, so of course, as every young lad does, started off with just a mishmash hodgepodge of whatever I could put together. You know, I was a big Blue Eyes White Dragon fanboy back in the day,
Kaiba.
As most villains are. But my first actual archetypal deck, and this is going to be such a throwback, I'm going to age myself here, was DD, as in different dimension, like DD Survivor, Macrocosmos, Dimension Fissure, things like that. All of those were at 3 during that time, and I remember going through, we were playing in the mall right next to a restaurant, and I remember slowly picking up the pieces. I saw DD Survivor, and that was the card that got me onto it. It was when I found a DD Survivor, and then slowly I found my way into getting the rest of it, and eventually I ended up with a triple macro, triple D Fissure, DD Survivor, DD Scout playing Warrior Ladies, all the real annoying nonsense as a kid. That was around the time of the original Machina structure deck.
Okay.
After the Ancient Gears, Machina Fortress comes out, and I believe that there was reprints of the gadgets in that structure deck as well. So that was the big thing at the time, was Machina gadgets with, normal summon gear frame, set up a fortress, and then pass. That was a big time because that was when we finally got a common reprint of Torrential Tribute in that structure deck. So that was a huge deal for everybody. And I remember the first tournament, I took my 60-card DD deck to locals.
60 cards.
60-card DD deck to locals. I remember my little brother was there as well. I don't remember if he had an actual deck by this time, but I remember the guy that organized the tournaments there after the tournament bought him a Machina structure deck just that way he could have a copy of Torrential Tribute to kind of help out. Dude was a bit of a weirdo and a bit of a cheater, but that's beside the point. He did something nice. It was cool.
The homie.
And then nowadays, it just depends. I was really big on Drytron last format. Now I'm back on Eldritch. I'm a control player at heart. I played Cliffort with Lose One Turn and Vanity's Emptiness and all that. So I was a Monarch player, Domain. I never played Extra Deck Monarch, so I like to flip my purple cards and let them do the talking for me.
Yeah, if you've seen on the channel, you've seen me lose to him flipping purple cards. So
hopefully many more to come.
Hopefully not. But no, that's kind of interesting thinking about like my perspective of, I started playing when I was like super little, but I never played competitively. Again, I had like whatever I had kind of that I just like had gotten bought for Christmas or like pick up a pack or whatever. I remember playing with a bunch of my friends and having cards. No one knew what anything did. I remember there was this one spell card. It was an old spell card, and I don't even remember what it was called or what it did, but it was like a little ceremony thing, and it had like a box and like soul spirits or whatever going into it.
Okay.
I don't even remember what it was called. I remember like we made up this effect that like everything that went to the graveyard went into that, and then like on like whatever turn it exploded, and then like everything got put on the board that was in there. It was stupid.
So you were playing Monopoly free parking.
Basically Monopoly free parking. No, but coming back into the game, I like most people started back on the TCG grind, like when quarantine hit. And I was like, well, I'm gonna sit here. My roommate has a bunch of decks put together. We'll just play all the time, and that's kind of how I got back into it. And I remember first getting back into it, I played kind of like the rocket deck, the rocket structure deck that came out. So it was like kind of like half Dragon Link, half rocket. And I kind of like slowly built up pieces there, but I didn't play competitive. And then when I first started playing competitive, I bought an entire Animancipator deck and played Animancer Prank Kids, just because I very much like whenever Konami executes like things that thematically make sense. So like, for example, like the Animancipators, like they're literally just a bunch of archaeologists searching for rocks, and that's what they do. You normal summon, special summon, activate effect, dig for rocks. And so I thought that was really cool. And also their cards looked pretty cool, and I thought Dragai was awesome. So that's kind of the first deck I played, and I liked it a lot. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I eventually switched on to the Tri-Brigade stuff. I really enjoyed Tri-Brigade a lot. I thought Omen looked sick, and like just all their cards just had really interesting effects and were cool. Revol is still a stupid card, but
that's where I thought it was, because that's where I met you, was when you were playing Melfi Tri-Brigade.
Yeah, Melfi
I saw
Tri-Brigade.
you play it one time, and then after that, I never saw the Melfi cards again, because I think we bullied you out of it into realizing that the Melfi cards may not be the best way to play that.
Yeah, well, especially at the beginning of my competitive like journey, it was basically like what I had around type thing. So luckily, I had access to some friends in Odessa. Shout out to like Tom and all of them over there, who I could buy deck course from, or they would lend me cards. And so it was Tri-Brigade and then Tri-Brigade Melfi, and then I went with them to Dallas to play, and they got me kind of on the Zodiac train, so I played the Zodiac. That tournament was the tournament right before Barrage got banned, so I got to play it for one tournament, and I was like, wow, this combo is insane. And then it was like next ban list over. And then with the deck that I'm currently on, it's a very interesting progression. So what I'm on right now currently is Live Twin Dogmatica. It has just Winda in there, so it has a small Winda package, and it also has like the Scythe package, because if you don't play those cards, you're trolling. But it originally started off with the Amazements, and I just thought they were super cool. I think Arlecchino was sick, like just the fact that you could Book of Moon and like just pop cards and stuff like that. I thought that was super cool. So I started looking for decks that kind of paired well with that strategy. So it was trying to find trap tricks to go with it, because I thought that was cool. And then it was, I know that, and then it was, sorry, I blanked. It was the trap tricks, and then I was like, Eldritch, but I didn't want to pay for the Eldritch cards. And then it was, Evil Twin and Eldritch goes together, so maybe I can just supplement it in kind of a similar way. And so I got to like the Live Twin, Evil Twin stuff, and I just really enjoy how that deck plays. I think it's super cool. It's very kind of, very linear, but you kind of have a lot of ways to bait out stuff, which is super nice, a lot of extenders. And then now it's kind of morphed into what it is now. So it's interesting that like the deck that I've really enjoyed the most came out of like an archetype that I thought I was going to enjoy, but now isn't even in my deck anymore.
I mean, those linear decks are really good, especially if you're just getting in, because you have the ability to stick with it and not have to worry too much about making deviations from your plays. So with you've been able to do the Dogmaticas, the Amazements, the attempted Eldritch and Trap Tricks, but you were able to find out that those weren't what you liked.
Right.
And now, even if more good trap support comes out, or even just things that can work on small engines, you have the ability to just sub those in and try other things, because the Live Twin stuff is really streamlined.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry too much about making good plays with that, as long as you can remember to summon Trouble Sunny. That's pretty much the only thing you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, especially with like the way that I have it with kind of all of that stuff shoved into it, most deck profiles that I found online and stuff like that is just like Live Twin Pure, and it's like basically kind of how Tri-Brigade Pure almost is, where they set up their end board, and then they just play a bunch of like disruptions or hand traps and stuff like that. So I guess if I ever decide to go back to that, I will, but I don't know. It just seems less fun. I like having more possibilities to do with my turn than just, I'm going to do the same play 7,000 times, and I'm just going to, depending on whatever hand trap I have, you're either going to play or you're not going to play.
I mean, it's cool too, because if you're going to play something, if you were to go to like pure Live Twin, you could play like you're doing now, a bunch of trap cards, but you're playing engines to supplement your trap cards. Or you can play a bunch of hand traps to stop your opponent from playing. All you really need to do is set up one thing. It's kind of like Eldritch. you can put all your back row, and if you can find a small engine to work with it, like Jet Synchron in the past, then you have some progressive plays as well. So that way you can kind of be proactive rather than being strictly reactive. Mm-hmm. I even saw recently somebody said that he's doomed to losing all of his dice rolls, and he built a going second Eldritch with like Pankratops in the main and Kaiju Slumbers, and it was really cool. And the dude went like 3-0 at his locals, and I thought that was really cool. So
that sounds disgusting.
Yeah, so those small engine decks are really good for not only for new players but also for innovation from like older players.
Right. I think that's why we're seeing decks kind of like a Sword Soul be really popular right now, because it's very I kind of equate it to Tri-Brigade, where it kind of sets up its similar play. There's a bunch of different ways to get to kind of the end board with, I think it's like Chi-Shao and Blackout. I don't even know if people are actually playing the Blackout anymore.
Chi-Shao, Baron, and the Blackout.
Yeah, and then it's just, and then whatever variation, like with like the tennies, where they get, if you're going first, then it's kind of setting up like your free Blackout target, or if you're going second, then you just send the Ashuna to just get something off the board. So they kind of, like you said, it's very linear, but because it's so linear, there's so many other things you can do to play around disruption or to play around whatever your opponent has. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, so now you see, especially in recent weeks, there's a lot of Sword Soul DPE going around. There's a lot of Sword Soul Virtual World is becoming a thing. Mm-hmm. More Virtual World with a couple of Sword Soul cards thrown in, but they're still able to make Chi-Shao Baron because they only need one copy of each of them because they're one card synchros. So it's kind of an interesting progression of like going from stuff like Zodiac and how that was super busted because you had the one card XZs, and then now you have the one card synchros, which are kind of a 1.5 because you have to reveal a card for Moyi. And so you have this engine that you can play on one card to make a very powerful synchro monster to where you can supplement it with other things. And on paper, that's one of those things where it just dies to token collector, and then you realize, I have non-effect monsters because I have tokens. I'll just put in the Tenyis, and then the Tenyis don't lose a token collector. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things, like I was saying, with very, very simple and tight engines that you can just supplement with other things to kind of deal with the innovation from other players. And now the only real good answer to it is like Dark Ruler. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Lava Golem, if you're me. But
and Triff.
Yeah, and Triff. Shout-outs to Triff. Don't agree with everything that he says, but Eldritch is the best deck. But yeah, like Sword Soul is one of those things where you have to try and be one step ahead of them, just like with Tri-Brigade. But there's going to be a time where they're going to out-innovate you because their package is so efficient, at least until Konami steps in and says, we've made our money off of that product. Let's put something else out there.
I don't know, man. Phantom Rage has been out for a while. So have the 10s. So
true.
But no, kind of moving on to like our second point. So as we transition from like the decks that we enjoy playing and like what we've started on and what we've gotten to now, thinking of now as kind of a more experienced player, I would tout maybe you and Evan and maybe Bert and Juan and Zach. Pretty much everyone besides me, honestly, that plays here. But as kind of like the next level players of like y'all consistently do well, or y'all kind of at least have an understanding of like what to do in certain situations. So what do you feel like as the player you are now and thinking back to when you were starting, what do you feel like is the most difficult thing for new players to grasp? And I have some thoughts as well, but I wanted to get yours first.
In terms of like game mechanics, or
just anything. What do you feel like is some of the most difficult things for people to understand?
One of the things that's been really hard for me is to understand that a lot of the times you're just not going to win. You're just not meant to win some games, and that's just how it happens. So, I mean, I've been playing since I was 8, 9, 10 years old in tournaments, and I used to go to regionals every single year, multiple times a year. Shout out 2022 for coming back.
Let's go.
And I still don't have a top under my belt. Meanwhile, we have a couple of players here who have multiple tops under their belt, and they don't even play anymore. But like my closest finish has been 17th place out of a top 16. The weekend that Raging Tempest came out with the Zodiac monsters, I was playing DDD, and that structure deck got delayed by 2 months, and it got replaced with the Felgrand structure deck. Mm-hmm. So it got delayed by 2 months. I picked up the deck, and I played it. It was full power without the intervention of Zodiacs for 2 weeks exactly. And on that week that Zodiacs came out, I played that deck, to where I believe that any given like 2 to 3 card hand that included a starter was setting up Crystal Wings, Siegfried, and something else. It was like 3 to 4 negates, depending on what you were doing,
Right.
sometimes including a pop one if you're playing the Witch, which I was. And I think in that tournament, it was an 8-round tournament. It was 8 or 9 rounds, and I played against 5 Zodiac decks, and I lost to 1. So, but that one that I lost to was extremely decisive, and that one that I lost to is what bubbled me out. Mm-hmm. I ended up, the person who got 16th place was playing Zodiac, and I ended up getting 17th place. Oh. So you have to understand that, like, going through your progression, there's a level of dedication that's required, right. And I feel like you can't force that. You need to have some sort of love for the game, but also understand that with competition comes competition. You're not the only person out there competing.
Right.
You know, I feel like I should have had at least one top by now, but I also understand that maybe I'm not to the point where I am playing properly enough to have been deserving of that.
Okay, yeah, definitely. One of the things for me that just kind of a thought that I had when I was coming up with these questions, one of the hardest things for me to grasp was not to just kind of tilt whenever I saw a certain card on field, or like thinking about like when I can activate certain things. Like, so for example, like I remember when I first started playing, and like I would read cards, but not like, I would more so just like, oh, I know what this card does, so I'm not gonna type. Mm-hmm. So off the top of my head, the first thing I can think of is like something like access code. Yes. So someone would like summon access code, you know, I would have like imperm or whatever set, or like whatever, and they would activate effect. Oh, I can't respond to it. Okay, so I'm not going to do anything. So they would, you know, do it. And I didn't understand for the longest time that there was that resolution window after where I could imperm, and then that way, like it basically was just a 2,300 body on the field. And for the longest time, I would sit there and I would like do stuff. Or another thing that pops in my head, shout out to Tom, is like the second tournament I was ever playing competitively, and I was playing him, and he was actually playing Life Twin, and I had Imperial Order set. And he goes into his standby phase, shotguns his Cosmic Cyclone, targeting my set IO, and I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, like whatever. And so I just, you know, banish it, and he kind of looks at me weird, and I'm just kind of sitting there, and I'm not even thinking. And then we talk about it later, and I was like, I always forget that like the chain resolves backwards, so like it would have just negated that, so it would have been fine. And then his entire play would have been shut off because he had like 4 other spell cards in his hand. And so it's like kind of like you said, like mechanics, but also like understanding like the way cards work, even if it's not directly specified.
So things like that are really important, especially for not necessarily a new player, but somebody like yourself who's like an intermediate, somewhere in the middle, where you haven't been playing competitively for very long. It's very important, and I still do this anytime that I pick up a new deck or something else that I want to play. I will set aside time in a day to pull out one copy of every card and read it in its entirety. Because not only does the card text matter a lot, but also the implications of what the card text means in a real situation. Mm-hmm. So, like you said, the Imperial Order against the Cosmic Cyclone, right. There are situations in which people don't know how game state affects certain things. So, meaning like if you have a card that's unaffected by card effects, a question that I'll get a lot is, can this be tributed by a kaiju? And of course, the answer is yes, but not everybody would know that because it's not a card effect technically. Yeah. So, you know, I get a lot of questions, things like that, being the rulings guy around here, being the active judge in our area.
Shout out.
Yeah. Shout out to the other 2 to 3 judges that are around here that don't do anything for it. But it's something that you see a lot, especially with things like Imperial Order. And, you know, some people don't know that if you have less than 700 life points now with the new errata, you can keep it up and still get that extra negation through your standby phase until it destroys itself. Things like Mystic Mind during the end phase, Card of Demise during the end phase, that you as the turn player choose when to resolve things rather than them having to happen once you meet that certain standard. So things like that are very, very tricky to understand, and even they trip me up sometimes too. But just like you were saying, those are very important to get around to learning later on. So I highly encourage anybody who's maybe having some trouble to read your cards all the way. And if you don't fully understand it, read them again, because there are a lot of words on all the cards nowadays.
Yeah.
Shout out to Endymion, the Mighty Master.
Hey.
That dude.
The mighty essay.
Yeah, the mighty essay of Magic. Just read your cards, and it will save you a lot. And read up on the rule books. You know those little paper rule books that you get in your structure decks? Read them. They're very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Another kind of thing that I was thinking of as well is like stuff like Winda and Scythe, like being able to like imperm Winda and it's effectively useless, or being able to like imperm or like Chalice Scythe when it's first summoned, and it doesn't do it. It only like happens like on summon if you don't react, and then it kind of triggers through. So it's like those kind of things where it's like, oh, this card is annoying and it's an issue, but like there's an effective way to deal with it as long as I like have this card or whatever.
Well, going along with Scythe, there's another thing about it, not only that it's an on-summon effect, but also that it's a mandatory effect. So it's a type of thing that it will never miss timing, but also that allows it to be open up to some other forms of negation. Say if you have something like a Baron, and if your opponent Call of the Haunted's a Scythe for some reason on your turn, that Scythe will always activate. Just like Traptrix and Myrmelio, that's how Traptrix have their main play, is they summon Sarah, and then Sarah summons Myrmelio. Myrmelio, when she's special summoned, will always trigger to destroy a spell or trap card on the field, even if there's not one. So then Sarah triggers after that, but you end up with a situation where a lot of times on turn one, if your Myrmelio activates, and your opponent happens to have a Ghost Ogre in your hand, then you've lost a big resource.
Right.
Because it has to activate, and you can't play around that. So with Scythe, you're always vulnerable to things like Chalice or Herald of the Orange Light or Baron or anything like that, because it will always activate no matter what. If your opponent has no extra deck, it doesn't matter. It's still going to activate. If your opponent can't summon from the extra deck already, it's still going to activate.
Right.
So things like that are very important nuances to notice.
Yeah, and that definitely comes down to like just like mechanical play and like understanding like exactly how cards, like you said, they interact with each other. I think one of the things so there are two big things, and this will kind of go into the next topic a little bit, but there are two big things for me personally that I feel like made me from like a beginner kind of like okay-ish player to like at least a decent player. I would say that I feel like I'm pretty good now. Compared to, who I play against. Like, y'all are all super good, but I feel like I can equally take games off y'all if I play well and don't kind of do stupid things. But the two biggest things in my brain that have made me a better player is, one, just learning how to side. Like, learning how to side for me was absolutely huge, in understanding, like, sometimes it's okay to lose a little bit of consistency if you're playing more cards that are going to help you, like, break your opponent's board or stuff like that. So, like, learning how to side was huge for me, and then I just completely forgot the first one. It'll come back to me, but just learning how to side was super important, and just kind of understanding like what is okay to side out, what needs to be sided out, like in this matchup, what is like a more impactful card to have. Like, do I need the 3 Ash, or do I side out the 3 Ash for the 3 Droll? Like, because is it more important that I stop them from adding after their first, or is that first card too powerful? I need to ash them on that first card. And so it's just like, I'm curious of like if you have any tips on like how to side for people who feel like they don't know how to side well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to plug this guy on YouTube. His channel is GGYGO. You should go check it out. I've studied him a lot recently. He's a Sky Striker player. He's a well-known player. I don't remember his name, so forgive me for that. But he's played Sky Striker since release, and he still plays Sky Striker now. But a couple of his videos that he does is on how to side deck. And so he explains about the 3 ways that you can side deck. That you can side deck to make your deck better, you can side deck against your opponent's deck, or you can side deck against your opponent's side deck. So what he means by that is, in a lot of situations, you are either siding in cards to make your deck better, whereas if you're siding in things like different trap cards, if you're playing going first, if you're, say you have Rivalry in the main deck and your opponent is playing a mono attribute deck, you can side those out for Solemn Strikes or something else that's going to be more applicable. You're siding to make your deck better. If you're siding against your opponent's deck, say they're playing Fluanderees and you're taking out your Rivalries and siding in Mask of Restrict, you're siding specifically against a deck that's going to be tribute summoning. So, and then siding against your opponent's side deck is a bit of a big brain metagame thing where you're going into your game 2 and or 3 and you are trying to be one step ahead of what your opponent is going to do. So in a situation like me where I'm playing Eldritch, I don't play anything in the main deck to stop me from getting blown out except for Imperial Order. So if I'm going into like a game 3 situation and I'm going first, there are some times where I will side in things like Waking the Dragon, or sometimes and I haven't done this yet, but if I really want to be nuts, Starlight Road, because some people just draw Duster all the time, and it just happens that way sometimes. So most of the time, those aren't going to be main decks. The Dusters, the Evenlies, the things like that, the Hatrunades in some cases, if you're a madman, those are usually going to be in the side deck. So in that case, I'm siding forward to side against my opponent's sideboard, so that way I can beat them at what they're doing. But with that comes with time.
Right.
So it's always been said that it's more important to practice full matches when you're playtesting than just game ones, because you always play more games with your side deck than you do with just your main deck.
Right.
So it's very important to put the time into actually proactively thinking about what you're going to side. If you're playing against Sword Soul, you want to be siding in your dimensional barriers. You want to be siding in your summon limits if you're going first, if you can, but also your things like Dark Ruler and Kaiju Slumber if you're going to be going second. Whereas those types of things won't work against like a Tri-Brigade player. You're not calling links on Dimensional Barrier no matter how much everybody wants to. You have to pay attention to what you're siding it in, and the big important thing is why you're siding it in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. So the deck that I'm currently playing was kind of like this mastermind conglomeration of me and your brother Bert's kind of idea of like, hey, I want to play this deck. I don't really know what's good with it. You know, what do we want to talk about and stuff like that. And he was kind of like, we kind of came up with the deck, and you know, I kind of have edited it here and there, and I've kind of asked his opinion, and we've talked about it some too. And his thing that he always tells me is like, can you defend like your card choice type thing? And I always kind of go through in my head, and then it's like, okay, like, and that kind of reminds me of what the first thing that I feel like made me a better player is I didn't think of my cards in a vacuum anymore. So like I feel like when you play casually and you kind of just like play with friends, like you're like, oh, I'm gonna play like this one card because it comes up in this one niche situation and it's insane, and you get to feel like fucking Yugi Moto just popping off Heart of the Cards type junk. But I learned very quickly that like I need my deck to be like very streamlined as possible, because my hand of 5, you know, unless I'm freaking Mexican Yugi 1, is probably always going to be some random combination of some random 5-card combination of the 40 cards I'm playing. So I need them to be as like kind of mixed match as possible, where regardless of, unless I like just straight up brick, and like sometimes that's just going to happen like in my deck that I'm playing now, if I just draw like 5 trap cards or whatever, then like that's just the reality of it. Like hopefully one of those trap cards is Imperial Order and like 3 strikes and I'm chilling. But not thinking about my cards in a vacuum, more as in like, okay, how do they play? Do they play well with each other? What are some of the things that I can do in order to like, if I'm going first, I'm just gonna, you know, try to go for my Sunny Snitch Dogmatica play. If I have the cards available, I'm gonna try to go into the Scythe combo, or I'm gonna try to go into like getting Winda set up for their turn. If I'm going second, then I have a couple different options. I can, if I'm not worried about disruption, I can just go through make Sunny Snitch or Trouble Sunny, you know, just activate the effect to get the other 2, and then I can use that send because it's basically free, and I play the big one in deck, so that's super nice. I'm always a proponent, play the big one in deck just because you always have a free send. But or I'm actually playing the Sky Cavalry package, so it's just like, oh, normal summon, oh, they summon another one, they're both level 2, Sky Cavalry, I can punch into literally anything because I can just detach to bounce it, then I get a free Zeus, and I'm not playing the downer, so I'm only getting 1 Zeus if I'm detaching. But I mean, I'd rather, you know, wipe the board in that case. So it's like I have a couple different ways, and so it's like not thinking about your cards in a vacuum, more of like how do they all work in tandem together to get you to that end goal of either setting up a board that your opponent can't play through, or attacking for game, or making sure that you're just going to straight win.
Well, going along with that, it's also, you know, synergistic things that you need to think about. Like you said, you're not playing Downard, and that's for you is probably a consequence of not having a lot of space in your extra deck, because
Right.
you do have to dedicate like 6 to 9 slots in your extra deck just for the Live Twin stuff.
Right.
But also, when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind is that your pink into blue or blue into pink into Sky Cavalry into Zeus is 4 summons. So if you summon the Downard, that's 5 summons, so you can get hit with an Nibiru.
Right.
But going along with some not thinking about your cards in a vacuum, like if you, I think it was MBT, the meme lord himself,
Yes,
that
sir.
said,
The meme lord.
if you look at the Fluanderees cards, these are some of the strongest cards ever printed, but you don't play Yu-Gi-Oh by yourself.
Right.
And you don't play Yu-Gi-Oh in a vacuum. If you read the card text and nothing else, some of those cards are some of the most insane cards that are ever printed. The trap card that stops your opponent from special summoning, but they can normal summon 3 times.
Yeah.
The card's nuts. That card is
that's
insane. However, in a lot of situations, sometimes those 3 normal summons will just get you killed. A lot of decks will just play out of their hand like that, and they can put something on the board that's going to just absolutely kill you. So I think it's very important to take the blinders off and look at not each card individually other than reading the card text,
Right.
but to look at everything as a whole and see how things work together. You know, if you're playing something like when I play Synchron, if I'm looking at Psy Reflector puts a monster on board and gets me a useless card to my hand, but then if I think about Assault Beast and then Chaos Ruler, Pepega Ruler, that guy?
Pepega Ruler.
Yeah, that one. It's one of the strongest level 8 synchros printed in a very long time, and so Psy Reflector gets me there, which then allows me to go into a crazy combo and set up 3 to 4 negates. It's very important to look at your cards for more than what they are, because if I start my deck profile by showing somebody that I'm playing Assault Mode Activate, everybody's going to raise their eyebrows at me and click off the video.
Right.
But if I start off by showing that I'm playing E-Tele, Psy Reflector, and Chaos Ruler, then everybody's going to understand why I'm taking the card choices that I am.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of transitioning that into the next point is, so we've kind of touched on this a little bit here and there, but we kind of really haven't addressed it that much. What, in your opinion, makes a player good at the game?
As a noted not good player of the game, I feel uniquely qualified to give my opinion on this. That, like I said, I've been playing this game for a very, very long time, and I still consider myself to be dog at it. So I think that to be a good player, a lot of it comes from being self-aware and managing your expectations. So the mental game is 50% of what you're doing, right? So understanding that you're not going to win every tournament you go to. Most of the time, you're going to lose most of the tournaments that you're going to go to, and pretty badly, I might add, especially for myself. But also understanding that you're going to have formats where you're better than you were before, and you're going to have formats where you're worse. I go through, if you're a fighting game player, you'll know what I mean when I say a character crisis every format, because I don't like to play decks that I don't enjoy. And so, during Tri-Brigade Drytron Virtual World format, I picked up Drytron as soon as everything dropped, and I loved the deck, but I eventually got bored of it. And then the format kept going and kept going and kept going, and I found myself playing all these crappy decks because I was bored of the meta decks. So I found myself losing tournament after tournament after tournament because I didn't want to play something meta. And then I finally just kicked myself in the ass and I picked up Virtual World, and then I started winning tournaments again, and then I started playing something lame again, and then I started playing now Eldritch again, and I'm winning tournaments again, and it's my comfort zone. But I understand that in this next format, if for some reason like Drytron Alpha Thubin gets banned and Virtual World Lulu gets banned and Fractal gets banned, then
The starters.
all of that stagnation is going to be gone, and then I will have another opportunity to see if there are more interesting things that can go into the meta that I'm going to enjoy. So for me, being a good player for me has come from a place of accepting that not every format is going to be for me, because I personally cannot get into it if I don't enjoy it.
Right.
But also there's, macro play, looking at the big picture and learning not to just blind MST whenever you have one, if you're still playing that. And something that I've learned somewhat recently is like learning when to hold your resources, especially if you're playing, like I play Eldritch, and if I'm going first and I'm playing against somebody who's playing like Sword Soul or Mech Knight or anything that I know can go second very well, if I open up with like a skill drain and there can be only one and any number of Eldritch trap cards, I understand that like my Golden Land trap cards are not real. My Elixir is the only thing that makes my Golden Land trap cards real. However, if I open up with a skill drain and if there can be only one, a lot of times if my hand is those 4 cards, skill drain, there can be only one, Conquistador, let's say a Solemn Judgment, and any monster, let's say Eldritch because I draw that all the time. I'm going to set just one of the Floodgates and a Solemn Judgment, and I'm going to pass because a lot of times holding those resources, either your opponent's going to activate their blowout card, and if it's not Solemn Judgment, we'll get rid of them. Most of the time you're not going to die. But if you lose, then you understand that there was not a good chance of you winning that anyways. You're giving yourself more of a fighting chance for the next turn. So if I'm still holding 3 cards in my hand when it comes to my next turn, I still have 4 cards to play with, and I still have that great equalizer in there can be only one. Those floodgates are really, really important for playing something like a control strategy on something like Eldritch, to where you're just aiming to slow the game down and simplify, so that way you don't have to worry about getting too ahead of yourself and letting your opponent run wild. So I think it's very important to temper where you're putting your cards and when, and understand that if you're playing Sky Striker and you have 3 Widow Anchors in your hand, you probably only need to set one, because you're not going to need the other 2. If your opponent's playing Prank Kids for some reason and you can take their cat, or if you can take their normal summon, their turn's over. You don't need the others, and you're just opening yourself up to more risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, like you said, focusing on the macro play and kind of understanding what your cards do, holding your resources and stuff like that, you know, I kind of agree with you in that sense as well, because I think we all know, you know, some people that, and when I was kind of getting in the game, I was like really freaked out about like the price of cards, like especially Ash. Like I remember Ash was like the first big hand trap, and then I remember Dual Devastator. Dual Devastator came out, and I was like, yes, I get my 1 copy of Ash. Let's go. I don't have to spend $40, but I ended up spending $40 on Dude anyways. But whatever, or 20, however much it was. But I mean, there is kind of like there's a small ledge in terms of like the game, like when it comes to like the amount of money you have to put into it, because like obviously like, you know, getting Ash is, and the hand traps are kind of your big things, you know. Most of the time your engine cards, like unless it's like the Ecclesias or like the Moyes of Sword Soul and stuff like that, are going to be like your really expensive engine cards. But like outside of that, like it's pretty cheap. Like I think you can pick up most of the Sword Soul minus like the Moyes and the Ecclesias, and even if you get the Moyes, I think you can pick up that whole deck core for maybe like 120 or like around there, depending.
Right now the Moyes are about 40s a piece.
Yeah.
But you're right, there is a bit of a barrier to entry, but in recent years it's kind of been better. You know, there's always times where it kind of ebbs and flows, but recently looking at things like Virtual World was the best deck for a really long time, and you can buy that deck for pennies. Yeah. You know, that deck was very, very cheap. The only thing that was expensive in the deck was Lulu, and Lulu was like $25 to $30 before the reprint. And now after the reprint, she is like $4, maybe. A couple dollars. Yeah. So a lot of times there are options that you have to take that budget alternative, but still have something competitive. Yeah. But there also are a lot of times where you just don't have that option. Back playing in Mermail Fire Fist format, you weren't playing competitively in that format unless you had that kind of cash to drop. Right. I won 1 locals in that time that I remember, and I was playing Jurak Evol, and I beat a Fire Fist player in the finals with that deck because I had the Logias and the Dolkas, because that's where I chose to put my money in, was Photon Shockwave rather than Abyss Rising, because I knew that the Mermail deck was going to be really expensive, and I thought it was cool, but I also was like maybe like 15 at the time. I didn't have a job, so I put the little bit of money that I could into getting a couple Logias and Dolkas, and having just those power equalizers are very, very important for somebody who's going on a budget. So having access to reprints in common of things like Dark Ruler No More, ultra rare evenly matched, super rare infinite impermanence, common Ash, even Ash is never going to be below $10, and I don't understand why. The commons are still like 20s. But
absolutely.
The idea is there that you can have these very powerful cards so that way the players who are newer, maybe younger, and on a budget are able to actually come play and maybe not get dumpstered as bad as they would otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they can have these equalizers, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video about that time with the Torrential Tribute in the Machina Madness structure deck. That was a very big deal because before that, Torrential Tribute, I believe, was only an ultra rare. It might have been an ultra and a gold rare. But at the time, Torrential Tribute was an expensive card,
right.
And then it got reprinted into a common. And that was a big deal because a lot of newer and younger players were able to have ways to beat these other decks that they wouldn't have had before. So it's very important for those reprints to happen, even though people will complain about them.
I mean, absolutely, yeah. But I mean, continuing on kind of the point that I was going with at the beginning was like, we all know someone who has access to the droplets, who has access to the evenlies, the secret ashes, like all this stuff, basically has the ability to either buy or procure any deck, any staples, whatever that they want. And they show up and they're like, oh, we have the best cards, I'm playing the best deck, whatever like that. And then they get absolutely dumpstered. Mm-hmm. And then, they're like, well, I'm playing the best deck. And it's like, well, yeah, you might be playing the best deck, but are you piloting it effectively? Like, yeah, you can kind of shadow box yourself through the combos, but unless you're playing against someone who's going to actively push you, actively make you have to think differently or stop you at different places, when you play against people who actually kind of have a comprehension of the deck or at least know like where the choke points are, then it's like you play them and it's like, oh, I've never been stopped here because when I play myself like solitaire and I like give my opponent like a hand trap or whatever, they always ash me like somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so it's like where I feel that you become a good player is not only having the ability to like have the cards, and even if you have like a bad deck, like I've seen people still win with bad decks, and it's like it's just because they're the better player. For example, the recent, I think remote duel or extravaganza or whatever, I think like B Trooper got first.
B Trooper got second.
Got second, yeah, and everyone was like, the B Trooper deck it's not bad by any means, like it's good.
As a B-Trooper player, the deck is bad.
But the fact that it was piloted by, a very well-known player who's very good, he understood, like, how to maneuver around the deck's weaknesses and play around them effectively enough against, people who were playing Leerless Tri-Brigade, who were playing Sword Soul Tenny, who were playing the Prank Kids and all the other stuff like that.
Also, a very important thing to note about that is that this player was able to see something that, I'm not a veteran B-Trooper player myself. I've played it a couple of times, but he was able to see something that a lot of people didn't see, and is that DPE slots really well into that deck. And I haven't seen anybody else use it before him in B-Trooper, but it does a lot for the deck, surprisingly enough. I guess you can put it into any deck and it's really good, but when you put it into a deck like B-Trooper that is very fair and can also do some unfair things given the right hand, if you just give it a very easily accessible unfair card like Dragoon, like DPE, those decks quickly get out of hand. So the fact that he was able to see that and implement it to great success, even though he didn't win the event, he got second place, which is much more than most players can say about themselves, myself included, that's really good. So that kind of shows his hallmark as a good player. You see people like Jesse Cotton. They'll bring, when he brought out his combo Danger Thunder Dragon deck that was building a board of like Apollosaver 3 and Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss and Hope Harbinger Dragon, nobody was expecting Thunder Dragon to be played in that way, and it was just kind of a side engine in the deck. And so when he brought that out, that then became one of the best decks because he was able to identify a niche that was a very, very strong combo deck that wasn't stopped by much. The only way you could stop it was with multiple hand traps or if your opponent had bad luck and on their dice rolls. So I think absolutely part of being a good player is being able to find and identify those weak points and capitalize on them.
Every time I think about that deck, I remember YouTube just recommending me the feature match where he plays against that one kid who like is just playing some random collection of cards, and so like Jesse wins the die roll and he full combos or whatever, and the kid like scoops, and then the kid like draws his 5 cards, like sets like 2 cards, and he passes, and then he gets OTK'd again. And I'm just like, this kid had no idea what he was in for, and I just felt bad because he was just getting his world rocked. And I was like, man, imagine first round, probably like your first YCS ever. He was like maybe like 14 or 15. And first round, first YCS ever, you're all excited. You play against a pro player who's playing like the best deck, and you just get like OTK'd like twice in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, but that's how it is sometimes. And I think that that's really important, because I would hope that kid continued playing and learned from that experience. Like my first regional experience, it was in Abyss Rising format when Mermail was the best deck and Fire Fist was right behind it. I believe it was 3-axis Fire Fist at this time. I might be mistaken. I think that's a little bit later when Dragon Rulers come around. But it was Mermail and Fire Fist, and I was playing Gishki Hieratic. Gishki is one of my all-time favorite decks, and I was playing Gishki Hieratic, and I was a kid. I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old, and we went to a regionals down in San Antonio at Heroes and Fantasies, and we played a 9-round tournament, and I walked out of that building 0-9. And it was X9, and that was the dream, and it was really, really hard for me to deal with at the time, but looking back on it now, that gave me the experience, because I met a lot of really cool people there, and I learned that, I kept going with Gishki, and from then on, I played a lot of different iterations of the deck, and my most successful was in Nekroz format when Nekroz was tier 0, and I won locals 3 times in a row, playing against multiple Nekroz decks in a row, because I was playing Zeal Gigas Turbo. And Zeal Gigas Turbo is just, you put out your level 10, that's a 3,200, you pay 1,000 life points, draw a card. If it's a Gishki monster, you can non-targeting shuffle a card back on the field, back into the deck. So you're making 2 of those, attacking for 64, and then making Gustav Max in main phase 2, and then killing them, burning for 2,000. And this was Domain Monarch, Nekroz, and none of the decks could deal with it, but me, not understanding what I was doing at the time, was that I had, in my little dumb brain, identified a niche that was really good against the meta. This OTK deck that was very hard to stop, because I didn't have to use the extra deck except for the Gustav. And by the time that I got to the Gustav, their Unicorn was off of the field. I had that resource loop to where I could use Zeal Gigas 3 to 5 times in a turn, pay myself down to draw a bunch of cards in and shuffle a bunch of cards back in. Kind of like how Madolche does with their Tiramisus, but they only go to 3 because they're not as cool as Gishki does. But things like that, like being able to identify holes in the meta, even if you don't know that you're doing it, will pay off in spades for you by doing your research and knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of getting to the last point here that I have anyways. So we've I've kind of been trying to like push for like making a bunch of content. I know that a lot of my content is like kind of what's already pretty saturated in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. It's like the duel reviews, or just like the show matches from our locals and stuff like that, and also the deck profiles, which depending on whose you look at, some memes are thrown in, especially the non-meta ones. But what content do you feel is missing for new players to get into the game, or for current players? What is there like a certain type of content that you feel like is missing? And I have my own answer on this, but I want to see if you have anything first.
Sure. So for new players, I think it's very tricky, because every new player wants to be good at the game, but you run into a situation where you'll be overloaded with information. Myself as a new player, when I first started, I was watching YouTube videos and trying to find how to get better at the game, but I was finding things that were way above my level of understanding at the time. And so I think that something that Team APS does really well, and I generally don't really enjoy Team APS's content, but something that I think that they do really well is that they appeal to casual players in a competitive way. So you'll see them doing like a battle pack tournament. They're just getting around with a bunch of friends, opening up this $20 product and playing a tournament style where there's some sort of winner at the end. So they're not just throwing together a mishmash, and they go through and explain why they're doing certain things, so that way these kids and newer players, not all kids, but newer players as well, can understand that these cards that you're seeing in like your battle packs or whatever loose packs your grandma's getting you from Walmart, that you can understand that they are more than what is just on the card, that there is some synergies. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Team APS, but shout out to them for sure. because they do a really good job of, I guess, making competitive casual content. It's very good and it's very important. I feel like Team Sam does that a bit too, and he kind of gets hated on for it as well. But he does a lot of good for bringing new players into the community, and I think that that's very important. And then, of course, you can always transition into their more competitive content, like where Paul from Team APS does like ban list discussions and talks about the meta and ways to subvert it. And Sam talks about new and upcoming things that are going to be really strong for the meta. He might sensationalize a bit, but
just a little bit.
It's very good information, and I think that those two channels specifically are very good for that transition. And I think that where you come in as a smaller creator, it's pretty important to do the things that you're doing with like doing deck profiles and showcasing different things. And now that you're starting to do different deck profiles, like now you're doing your journey through Jank, I think that's really cool because a lot of like newer players are not going to be playing these meta decks. A lot of them are going to be playing whatever they can afford or whatever they can find at the time. And I think it's important to show somebody like, oh, I want to play Ancient Warriors, and then you can go click-clack on your computer and find the Nautical here with my brother's dumb face on it,
Yes,
playing
sir.
Ancient Warriors. So I think that's really cool because, you know, I like to play off-meta things all the time, and it's really good to be able to find a resource for that. And that's very hard to find a lot of the time. So I think it's good. I'm going to give myself a bit of a pat on the back here for hosting these non-meta tournaments for not only new players, but returning players as well, to be able to get something that's not a taste of the meta, get something, a bit of a break from the monotony and play something different and more fun to kind of revitalize and remind people why they love this game in the first place.
Right, absolutely. What kind of I was thinking in terms of like what I feel like when I was kind of like in that process of like trying to go from decent to good-ish player is, and I was kind of talking to your brother about it the other day, and I kind of came up with this word off the top of my head, but deck roadmaps. I feel like, and kind of what I mean by that is, you know, like you said, you go in and you type, you know, Drytron deck profile or whatever, and they're gonna, you know, show all their cards. They're gonna be like da 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 da, and maybe they'll have like one or two like test hands or whatever at the end, but stuff like that. But they don't really explain how to play against the deck. And so because like for me, you know, I'm playing competitively against, like, for example, your brother when I first started playing, and he's playing Drytron, or Evan's playing Drytron, and I'm like, okay, I have, you know, Ash in my hand, or I have like an Imperm. What do I do? Like, I've never really played against the deck before. I don't know, like, am I wasting my Ash here, or am I like wasting my Imperm here? Is it useless? Like, you know, stuff like that. And there's a lot of variety, especially just because of, like, you have 5 random cards. So, like, I could have, you know, the Ash, the Veiler, the Imperm, or whatever, and it's like, no, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna, you know, drop Itelli, or I'm gonna drop Desires into Lulu Itelli, and it's just gonna kind of be whatever.
Right.
But I feel like the thing that's missing is, like, you always hear about, like, the fabled, like, spreadsheets of, like, oh, here's
The
all
spreadsheets.
here's the spreadsheets, like the flow charts and all that stuff like that. But, like, for new players, it's like, you know, it is always going to depend solely based on what they have in their hand. But, like, if these are the trap cards, or if, like, these are the hand traps, or these are the disruptions you have, like, these are the good places to hit, because it either stops their turn, or they have to pivot into something that's less optimal, or they have to waste more resources to do so. And so I felt like for me, that was where content was lacking when I was trying to learn, because it's like, I mean, luckily, you know, everyone here is nice enough to be like, oh, like, you want to try to stop the deck, this is probably, like, the best place. Like, when I was playing Juan's like, you should, like, always Ash Lulu, because if you Ash Lulu, then that, like, hurts the deck really bad, and you kind of do whatever. Or, like, you always save your effect negation for the Ultimate Zokin, because then I don't Crystal Wing, and I can't, like, pop off further if you have other hand traps you've saved, and stuff like that. Or, like, Drytron, I still really don't know what to do against Drytron, except hopefully have Droll or Dark Ruler no more. And against Leerless Brigade, it's like, just try to hit something and pray to God that they don't have the extension to play through, or like a Bird Call again. But for me, that's where I felt like content was lacking on my end, of just like, how do you play against these decks? What are the best places to hit?
So I think that MST TV does a really good job about doing stuff like that, where Tombox, every format, will go, and I think he does it every month actually, but he makes this big PowerPoint of common hand traps and like interaction cards versus the top decks, and like they explain where you should hit them and if they're good choices against those decks. So I think that is a bit more of a general way to play against things, but I think that it might be good to do a series on like how to beat X deck. You know, if you want to do how to beat Adamantipator Prank Kids, like where do you stop them, so that way you can tell them, you know, if you're gonna Ghost Bell their first normal summon, or Ash Blossom whatever their Adamantipator guys that they're summoning the first time. So I think that it would be good to allow people to have a way to look for things that they're having trouble with in their locals and at other tournaments, and to understand what to do against them, because that's normally the type of experience that you only get from playing against them and losing to them multiple times.
Right. Like, I mean, for example, like, I've lost against Drytron, like, I don't know how many times. Like, I lost against freaking Virtual World, I don't know how many times. You know, I've lost to Earth Machine, I don't know how many times. And it's like, every time I played the deck, I would try to hit them in a different place, but they would either, like, still end on, like, the Herald of Ultimateness, or they would still end on, like, Shenshin, or they'd still end on, like, you know, whatever, the Machina Fortress or whatever it is. And it's like, to an extent, like, there's an amount of inevitability because they do have they do have 5 cards in their starting hand, so like they could just have the extenders. And like in that case, it's like, yeah, whatever. Like I put you on better have it, and you had it, so it's kind of whatever. But I think like going a little bit more in depth and being like, hey, these are the places that like really hurt to hit, because if you do, then their combo isn't as streamlined, or maybe some people don't normally stop it like there typically. I remember when I first started playing, I would make a lot of people mad, especially Nate, because I would interrupt him in very awkward spots a lot later than I feel like people typically did, and it would kind of like throw him off and be like, okay, well, I mean, I guess I do this instead, and maybe he gets to revolt, but he doesn't have, like, maybe he only has a 2-mat like Apollosa, or maybe he doesn't have the ability to make Apollosa, maybe he ends on like Rugal or something like that. And so it's like about where to hit, how to hit, and, you know, if they have it, they have it type thing.
Well, I think it's also very important to understand when your opponent or you, either way, may be doing something unorthodox for the sake of trying to play around the interruption. So in my example with Eldritch, a lot of times a really strong play is to activate your Conquistador first, and then if your opponent has no response, activate the Elixir after that. However, if they have the Ash Blossom in hand, that whole play is dead. And all you're doing at that point is just summoning a guy that has no effects. So when that became kind of the mainstream and people started understanding that they hold their Ash for that, a lot of times people will just, like in standby phase, activate the Scarlet Sanguine, and most of the time your opponent will just say, okay, I don't care about that, it's just an Eldritch. And then later on, when you go to activate the Conquistador, they can't respond to it. I mean, they can respond to it, but they don't have a good answer to it. So a lot of times when I play specifically, I'll do both in the same match. You know, I'll go for the Conquistador, then Scarlet play, and if I get ashed on that, then next time I will just activate the Scarlet by itself and then activate the Conquistador later. And I think, like you said, it's very good to be unpredictable and to do things in awkward ways that most people wouldn't understand, because there's only so much that you can learn from doing your test hands.
Right.
There's only so much that you can learn from watching a YouTube video. And a lot of this stuff you won't find out until you're sat down and somebody else makes you learn it, because they put you in that situation and you've got a 40-minute clock running. You have to figure out the answer very quickly.
Yeah. Another thing that I would say to like new players and stuff is it's okay to feel stupid, it's okay to like think back on something and be like, man, that was dumb. So like, for example, I test a lot with a guy named Joseph. He's our Thunder Escados player right now. We've kind of pared down his deck, and like his kind of main thing is to end on Hulk, Plague Spreader, and a level 8, and then so he can go into King Calamities and you just can't play for the turn. And I was sitting here, I was like, man, like if he gets to that, I have no way to deal with that whatsoever. And I was going to test with him yesterday, and I was driving in my truck just kind of thinking about it, and I was like, hold on, I'm trolling. I was like, if he sets that up, Hulk is only in main phase. So I just go draw, standby phase, Chalice, or Imperm, and his entire board is dead. Basically, I mean, he still has the bodies on the board, but for the most part, it's basically dead right there. And I was just sitting here and I was like, how many times have I lost to King Calamities with an Imperm or a Chalice in my hand just because I forgot that I can activate things during the standby phase?
Yeah.
Like the standby phase isn't solely just for like the cards that state standby phase, like DPE or like the Imperial Order, but it's like, someone I know who does it a lot too is like Juan in draw phase, or I think the person who actually like that kind of helped me click in my brain was when I played Zach at the non-meta, and during draw phase he would activate whatever Ultrageist card and then special summon Multifaker and do all of that during my draw phase, and I'm like, well, I can't, like, okay, now I have to deal with Multifaker, Silk, and something else on the board with 2 set back row, whereas like when I was first drawing I was just dealing with 3 back row. Now it's like I have an Ultrageist card, I have Multifaker, I have Silk, and 2 back row. Now I have to deal with what do I do now type thing.
Well, it's also very important to understand that your phases are very important for utilization purposes other than that. So you have a card like Effect Veiler. A lot of times people will activate E-Telly during standby phase and summon something, and even if it's not like E-Telly specifically, something that can get a guy on the board to where your opponent can't Veiler you, that then their answer has to be Imperm or Ash or something different depending on what the card is. So you're kind of minimizing the amount of interaction that your opponent can have by using those phases to your advantage. You know, the only mandatory phases are draw, standby, main 1, and end phase. You don't have to go battle phase or main phase 2. If you go battle phase, you have to go main phase 2. But other than that, you have the option to forego those. So there are a lot of situations where if I see that my opponent makes 5 summons and I let them go to battle phase, or they ask to go to battle phase, and I have a Nibiru in my hand and I know that they can't kill me, there are some times when the situation calls for it. It's rare, but there are some times where the situation calls to let them go to battle phase. And then in their main phase 2, you can drop the Nibiru, and then most of the time they're going to have nothing.
Right.
It's almost equivalent to dropping Nibiru on hero players or Salamangreat players when they attempt to go to battle phase, because by then they're shot of resources.
Right.
And their turn ends. So there are some situations in which it's beneficial to use your phases to your advantage, but I feel like that's a pretty advanced thing to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what kind of helped me understand this was I played decks that utilized that, or utilized that kind of information, or taught me that. So like, for example, on the deck that I'm at now, if I go first, it's very realistic that like if I can put up enough stuff through the board, I can end on, after your turn, I could possibly end on both the twins on board, probably the Scythe, and like Winda. And like that's, I mean, or before it was like the Ecclesia with the Fleur-de-Lis. So that's, you know, whatever, 4 monsters on board, perfectly fine. And that was very reasonable to end up with. And so I was sitting here thinking of ways of like, okay, I set up my turn, I successfully stopped them from playing. Now how do I kill them on my turn? Through, you know, whatever disruption that they might have. And I realized that I can get into access code, and I can get into Trouble Sunny under 4 summons with a Nightmare spin back, under 4 summons, go to the battle phase, or I can, like, you know, pop whatever I need to with access code, go to the battle phase and hit for effectively, you know, I can hit for at least just with that on board, I think it's like 86, and then I can chain Trouble Sunny because it's not in main phase, only the little ones are in main phase, and that gets me 22 on board if I haven't banished one off of access code. And that protects me from Nibiru. So I can very quickly OTK you under Nibiru, you know, with a pretty reasonable board. And like being able to say, okay, like I not only have the ability to stop them from playing, but also the ability to OTK them back, so that way my resources have been used effectively. And so I think playing decks, you know, switching from the Animanspator to the Char Brigade to the Trap Good Stuff to now the Evil Twins, like my progression has taught me how to play different styles and also how to utilize those skills from each one effectively. And now, like, I feel like that is what has helped me not only become better as a player, but also like understand like the mechanics a lot more. It's like I've just played decks that I have to learn the mechanics, and if I don't, then I'm not playing the deck.
Well, I think it's very important to not only try to broaden your horizons with what you're playing, but also don't go too overboard with it.
Right.
You know, I do that where I'll jump from deck to deck every week, And that's very much to my detriment because I never fully understand one deck. So, like the times when I was playing Jurak Evals or Gishki or Eldritch, these were times when I was playing the deck week after week after week, and I learned all the interactions and I learned the very small, minute things that really do matter. So, there are times when I'm going through different decks, and a lot of times I'm just working off of a YouTube video or what I've taught myself just doing test hands. And that's not enough most of the time.
Right.
Most of the time, it doesn't cut it. So I think you have to find that happy balance between learning new decks and learning how to play different things that are maybe out of your comfort zone, but also putting enough time in to be able to learn the minutia and the small interactions that really do matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just kind of spanning everything that we've talked about, like being a new player, getting better, what it takes to do that and stuff like that. I think probably the thing that me and you probably know is like probably up the upper echelon of like things that you need that we haven't touched on yet is just like good people to play against. Like
absolutely,
like good people at locals, whether you only play people at locals or just like test partners like to play against as well. And like I know that I've tested against you a bunch. I've tested against Bert a bunch. I've tested against Jeremy and Joseph a bunch. I've tested against Nate a bunch. I've played Zach a couple of times, played Evan quite a bit in locals, and it's like I'm not nearly as good as y'all are yet, but just playing y'all challenging me in different ways and forcing me to have to think about the game differently has definitely made me a better player than I would have been if I just stayed and solitaired in my room and came up to locals, once or twice a week and then just left right after. It's finding those people that are willing to like help you out, help you get cards, help you understand, like kind of teach you different things that you might not know, and honestly willing to kick your ass a couple times.
So I think it's really important to know how to not necessarily network yourself, but just be able to talk to people.
Right.
And like if you can and you feel comfortable doing so, as much as you can, you should be playtesting in person.
Yes.
Because every online simulator is going to have some sort of quirk where you don't understand how the shuffling mechanic works. You don't understand how your probabilities work because essentially whatever you see on the bottom right side, that's your little stack of cards, all it is numbers, and it's just a randomizer. Whereas when you're playing in person, you can kind of understand how you're thoroughly randomizing your decks. You can understand how interactions work because you're forced to sit there and put that card in your hand and actually read it rather than just hovering over it and reading it on a screen.
Right.
So I feel like when I play online, I don't get as much information as I do whenever I play in person. And so like I've made the mistake, I've wasted a lot of money building decks just from playing online. I played Mech Knights on Dueling Book for like 3 weeks straight, and I got my rating super high out of it, and then I built the deck in paper and I lost 3 locals in a row, like losing almost every game because the deck just doesn't work the same.
Right.
Whatever it is in the algorithms that make it work better in those situations, or it could just be because of the people that I'm playing against online.
Right.
Those things are never going to be as equivalent as playing in person. So I understand, especially right now, like things are weird with people meeting in person, whatever, but if you can and you have a good group of friends that you trust and you want to learn together and to grow as players, spend your time together and play in person because it really does change the way that you absorb information and the way that you think about things a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. All right, guys. Well, that's it for the episode. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. I think we were able to kind of effectively communicate what our thoughts were on some of these topics and stuff like that. Do you have anything that you feel like we didn't get to, or anything like any shout outs or anything like that?
Yeah, so the more that we got into this, the more that I think that this is going to have to be a bit of a series because there's so much to get into, from being a new player to graduating into being a better player and getting better and learning new things. And I think that there's a lot of things that you can expose yourself to that will help you a lot. So I think that maybe this might be something we have to look into doing some more.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I am definitely I am going to YCS Pasadena, and I am going with some friends that have been playing for a very long time, also from Odessa, and so I'm going to pitch it to them to see if they would be interested in doing something kind of like this as well. Again, this was born basically out of the fact of I just realized that this is my 6th month of playing, and so it's very crazy to me to see myself going from, and I even thought I did like, honestly, I was like, oh man, the first locals I ever played at, I was insane. I went 2-2, and I was like, whoa, I was like, whatever. And then now I might not have that good of a record at times, but I feel like I'm a better player. And when I'm losing, it's either to my opponent just having it, in which case I'm like, it sucks, it's annoying, but whatever. But it's also to like, if I'm losing, a lot of times it's also like, I just misplayed really bad, or I wasted a resource, or I activated Nadir Servant before I summoned from the extra deck, and now I'm locked out type stuff. So just for me, that's where I've seen most of the growth, is just like understanding the way things work and finding a group of people who were as passionate about the game as I was, and willing to help me get cards, willing to test with me and stuff like that. So I think that was one of the biggest things, is like, just find, like you said, just find a group of friends that you're committed to hanging out with, that really want to play the game, and just play with them and play physically, and that's probably the best thing you can do, honestly.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to take this time to give myself a little plug here. If you want to find a good group of people to play, come out to Abilene. If you're in the area, even if you're not in the area, drive down here, fly down here, I don't care. Come down and hang out with us. I host non-meta tournaments every month, non-meta monthlies. I want to see about getting our shop owner to let us do them twice a month. But that's coming in the future. Hopefully, we'll have to see what he says. But I put up prizes every month out of my own pocket. So far in the last two, I gave 3 megatins to first place each time. First guy didn't open up so well. Second guy opened up a crossout designator, so that was cool. But that's just luck of the draw. And going into the new year, like, I've got so much cool stuff in the works. I've got really cool prizes coming up that not even you know about yet. So it's all been very hush-hush, and I only have a select group of people who know about it. But some really cool things are coming. The third Saturday of every month, we're doing non-meta monthlies here at the Gathering Place in Abilene. Check out Abilene Yu-Gi-Oh! Community on Facebook. Check out West Texas Yu-Gi-Oh! On Facebook. Check out the Nautical on YouTube. You'll see my dumb face there every now and then. I
got to plug in the West Texas Yu-Gi-Oh! Stuff. Team Golden Age, Tom, shout out to Tom and Adam. They're the 2 people I've probably got the most cards from. Really good guys, so go check them out. Give them a follow as well. And a subscribe. They're super awesome guys. But yeah,
I think that's all I got, other than come out, check out my non-meta tournaments. We're always here having a good time, and I just want to make it bigger and better and give more time for more people to understand and have more of a break from the meta and play something that'll take them back to their roots and be a little more fun and get some really cool and good prizing that you wouldn't normally get from an OTS event.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it.